being identified with thought, entangled in thought, distracted by thought, has many effects, side effects. One of the effects it has is it helps us, in quotes, helps us mitigate the experience of emotion. We don't recognize we're doing this most of the time. Not a conscious choice to, I think I'll think all day long. That way I don't have to feel. We're not even aware of that. But what I find is that as this unbinding continues, usually after a shift in identity and some exploration of the nature of repression of emotions and the nature of consciousness and thought and selfing, this exploration that happens and unfolds naturally after a shift in identity, I find that people come to this recognition of how widespread, pervasive, and slippery the repression of emotion is. And it's mechanistically not complicated. And it's also not personal, not a personal thing, really. Although the sense of being a person, or sense of shame, or sense of subjectifying does play a role in maintaining the seeming barrier between consciousness and the emotions. But mechanistically, it's rather simple. As long as attention's in thought, there can be this appearance of a kind of pseudo equanimity. I hesitate to use the word equanimity here because it's not equanimity, but it's kind of more like a numbness. And the strange thing is, it's not really doing anything to mitigate emotion. It's not doing anything to get to the heart of whatever that trigger might be, or whatever that even trauma around an emotional structure might be. It's just avoiding it, dodging it, using thought to do that. And it's an amazing mechanism, actually, the fact that it can do that for many years, decades, or an entire lifetime. It can cause us to not really be aware of what's going on inside, what's really driving us, what's really motivating us to do all the things we do. Even what's defining what we think we like and what we think we don't like, what we think we want and what we think we don't want. And really encouraging us to back those beliefs, those delusions, really. And all of that can happen through thought, through the complexity of thought, or through the mechanism of identifying again and again and again with one thought after another thought after another thought, so frequently and continuously that it starts to feel, and when I say it starts to, I mean a long time ago for any individual in childhood, starts to feel continuous, starts to feel like the world is continuous, like it's a big space in which everything occurs, and it's continuous in time, in some kind of solid timeline. That entire illusion is created out of thought. That's a seemingly pretty solid illusion, strangely. So, with all that said, of course, during this unbinding, at some point, you will start to engage emotion much more directly. Not usually by conscious choice, but simply because the apparent boundaries and barriers and identity structures and tendency to constantly self start breaking down. Then emotion just becomes more obvious. I find that there is quite a variation among people in how they respond to that, how surprised they are about it, and how much they resist it. Although there's going to be resistance in everyone to some degree, for sure. For many people, when this starts to happen, when the shadow material starts to come into consciousness, or you just become aware, you're dropping down into the emotions. It's probably a better way of saying it. It can feel undesirable, unenjoyable, to put it mildly. I remember for me when it happened many, many years ago, but it happened in a big way at first, just still full on. And it felt like, I'm trying to remember the way I interpreted it, but I remember the feeling of it. And it was just like, no, not this. Like, this is so uncomfortable. Like, why? Why is this happening? Um, how long will it be here? When will it go away? And not realizing, of course, that those are thoughts still trying to get away from it, not to drop into it. But I noticed now I can see in retrospect, it's obvious that there's this kind of gray area where you're starting to drop into emotion, but you're not really dropping in yet, not fully, or not consistently, or thoroughly. And it's muddy. Like there's a lot of misinterpretation of what is emotion and what is resistance to emotion, and even what is interpretation of emotion, and what is the sort of blanket of psychological fear and doubt about emotion that's trying to mitigate it with thought. Again, how long is it going to be here? How do I get through this? Or how do I meditate it away? Or just to kind of know, like, no, don't want this. Maybe it's what in common vernacular is like negative emotions. I always think that's a funny term, negative emotions. But it's like an interpretation of the emotion, but not the emotion itself, right? A categorization or a judgment about emotion shows how mind identified humanity is, right? There's negative emotions and positive emotions. But yeah, it was just kind of like a no. It was down like in the center, like in my chest, heart, gut, somewhere in there. But there was also a sense of trying to push myself back out of it, almost into my head. I'm not sure I recognized that in the moment, but I can tell now that energetically that's kind of what happened. Probably it's already happening, really. There's already that energetic seeming dualistic experience between body and mind. This, maybe simply speaking, it's just a tendency to put attention up into the head consistently. And so that was remaining even when the spell of identity broke or started to break. That there was this sense of energy or attention just moving upward into the head and moving away from that feeling. And it also came with pain in the head, tension in the face and the nose, headaches, all that. I didn't really put all this together at that time. They were like different things I noticed at different times because I was so lost in thoughts at times. These things would just pop up here and there. Now it's totally obvious. It's a very cohesive experience. Um, but we can have a very strong tendency to move energy upward into the head, even when the thoughts start to calm down, or really as the thoughts calm down. Not everybody experiences it this way, but very common to have headaches or tension in the face, pressure behind the eyes, forehead, a sense of like a subjective point. It feels like me in the face somewhere behind the face. So to summarize all of that, what I was experiencing was a more clear fundamental dissociation from emotion than I was before when I was in thought and just lost in thought. When you're lost in thought, you may not even recognize those emotional patterns, and the resistance to them are both there already, because they are. But again, thought is so adaptable in a way to its own process. It can just keep dreaming up new things to think about, new things to distract yourself with. But yeah, once that spell starts to break, you can't do that so much. Harder to dissociate through all the means that we usually do, including daydreaming, analyzing, judging, self-judging, beating ourselves up, all these little pastimes of the mind. And those aren't available. Then the interface or the conglomeration, I guess, of emotion and resistance to emotion just becomes much more obvious, more in the forefront, in the foreground. So when we're in retreat, in an environment like this, that can happen much more easily, even without any specific shift in identity occurring at a given time. We may suddenly start having that emotion break through. And it can be surprising. It may not be surprising, but sometimes it is. Like a surprising amount of emotion, a surprising intensity, or maybe I should say a surprising inability to like run from it or get away from it or have it not be there, supposedly. The ability to distract and run away is not so available. The emotion just says, oh, I can be here. I want to come. I want to be felt. I want to come into light, into experience. And it does. You can feel like a particular type of emotion, grief or something like that, right? Loss. It could be anger, shame, rage, resentment, guilt, ecstasy, joy, all of the above. Sometimes it's very ill-defined. You can't even tell what it is. It just feels like emotional outpouring. And it's just one of the textures of experience at retreat. I could say this is what you're here for, or part of what you're here for. If you're going through this, it's totally okay. And the first piece of advice I have is just to check in with any remaining thoughts around the experience that say like, hey, what can I do about this? What can I do to fix this? What practice or approach do I need to deal with this? And I won't say that there's never an approach or practice that can be helpful, but just notice the spirit of those thoughts that are kind of suggesting it needs to go away, that it shouldn't be here. Notice the strategies that we want to, and also notice often where those strategies lead. They don't really lead into the emotion, they lead into more thoughts, more analysis. So yeah, noticing the interpretations that come is helpful. Notice the fears. Like, what if this lasts throughout the entire retreat? Or what if this has no bottom? Or what if this makes me non-functional? Or what if this overwhelms my system? Those worries can be recognized as thoughts. And when something's recognized as what it is, it tends to settle, tends to calm down. It's when we don't recognize a thought as such that we're usually more identified with thoughts. The conundrum with thoughts, but that's kind of how it is. The more identified you are, the less you're aware that there are thoughts, the less you're aware of the beliefs that are shaping your experience. Just noticing what thoughts are there, what thoughts are stirring when you start having intense emotional experiences. You may have thoughts about the source of the emotional experience, like a trauma, or you may have thoughts trying to figure it out. Same thing. Just recognize that those are thoughts. And when you've settled the mind a bit in this way, settled the tendency to get entangled in thoughts, then you have an opportunity to just drop in and just feel what's there in a pure way. Just like we did in the guided meditation this morning. Just feeling. And this can vary quite a bit. It may be very direct, simple, and surprisingly enjoyable, or peaceful, or neutral. Or it can be a sort of uncomfortable experience, but still calming the mind. You're able to actually sit with that feeling, that emotion. Maybe there's still a little bit of analysis or trying to mitigate it, or a little resistance, but you're in contact with the feeling. You can feel it, you can find it here. And then sometimes it's like you've dropped out of thought to some degree, but there's still this strong sense of a visceral rejection of the experience, rejection of the emotion. Like it can feel almost like an electric wanting to run away from it, wanting to get away from it. Even if you don't know where you're trying to go, you just feel something wanting to move away. And no matter which of those three occur, it's the right way. It's fine. And if you do this enough times, if you stay in this space long enough, you'll experience all of them, for sure. You'll experience that intensity of resistance. That's often around emotions associated with certain traumas or blind spots, let's say, or more fundamental coping mechanisms upon which other more superficial coping mechanisms are built. When you really get down to the nitty gritty, you may find this occasionally, this intense resistance. Maybe we could call it energetic restlessness, but it feels intense. Again, if it had a voice, it would say, no, 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 or gotta get away, gotta get away, gotta get away from this. Don't want this. But even then, sometimes you'll notice it doesn't really even have a thought associated with it. It's just a kind of feeling. At least it doesn't have a conceptual thought associated with it. A feeling or a tendency, and it may feel old, like from younger life may feel strongly habituated, like it has a lot of momentum. And really, it's good to come into contact with this, not a failure, because it's really buried in most people. People that can look surprisingly relaxed and present, if they haven't done this work, it's buried in there. It's just a matter of conditions before it expresses. But you're through practice, through your own intention to live your own true nature, your own natural state, are purposely coming into contact with it, which is great. It's hard to give any advice around this specific thing because it's just so intense at times. Can be. Sometimes you just got to feel the intensity of it. There are somatic processes that can be helpful. For instance, something like TRE can be helpful. At the same time, even that can be something that's discharging it consistently such that you never really look closely and see what's at the core of it. Yeah, at some point, all spiritual practices, when it comes to this resistance, can become coping mechanisms. And you really kind of got to do the fish up the waterfall thing. In Zen, there's a symbol of a fish going up the waterfall. And of course, not all of spiritual practice is about effort and pushing and going against the grain. But this particularly can feel not like you're adding force to it. You don't want to resist the resistance, but it can feel quite like going up the waterfall to keep feeling the intensity of that resistance and yet still inquiring, what is the root of this? Where did I learn to resist? Is there anything actually resisting here? What is the lesson here? What wants to be revealed here? I don't know what your question is, but it's an intuitive question. This is an intuitive process. Being willing to still inquire, even if it's just through pure intuition, with this kind of intensity. This can lead to some very auspicious insights, big shifts, and deeper realization. On the other end of the spectrum, as I mentioned, sometimes you notice those thoughts around the emotions and the fear thoughts, psychological fear and doubt and distractions, and you kind of just set them all aside and just drop into the feeling. You realize, oh, it's mild. It's a pure feeling. It's a pure sensation. You're not dissociated, but it's not a problem. And there's little or no resistance. You're just feeling whatever it is. It'd be just a mere aliveness with no descript, like a nondescript emotional texture. Maybe sadness. Maybe joy. Could even be shame, or at least what's at the core of shame. Shame is a kind of multi-layered emotion. It's not shame without the protective barrier that says, don't look here, don't look here. That's part of it. That's not an emotion, but that's part of the shame experience. Once you really drop in, it's a kind of innocence. So either way, at either end of that spectrum, it comes down to a kind of perhaps a surrendered experience of pure feeling. Surrender just means surrendering your typical dissociative patterns, coping mechanisms, go-to thought processes or distractions, surrendering those and just finally feeling what's already there anyway. Already there. Just that you weren't there. You were off in La La Land. Not even really that, but just somehow not here in some strange way. But once you're feeling it, you're here. Now the ego has other tricks up its sleeve, even once you're able to kind of navigate what I talked about. And the next trick it has is doubt. Oh, this can't be it. Maybe you are feeling, maybe you are really just down in here. You dropped in, you're feeling what's there. Of course, the mind will be like, well, you should probably be feeling some sadness instead of this, or this isn't the trauma, or who knows what the hell the mind says, but it doubts the somatic experience. And then you're back in thoughts again, right? So it's helpful to recognize the signature of doubt and notice that you're feeling. You don't need to do anything more. It gets really simple. Once you're established in the body sense, you'll notice there is no body, no boundary, no center, no problem, no need for a solution, no coming or going, no birth or death. It's deeply peaceful, endlessly adaptable, deeply mysterious to the mind, which will never understand that. Thoughts won't understand that. Why all these descriptions are paradoxes to the mind. But to the heart, they're not. To the felt sense, they're not. It's more than enough to be merely here. And any intuition that's needed, again, another doubt could be, well, if I just stay in the body sense, I won't figure things out. I won't be able to live my life. I won't. By the time that's happening, you're already in thought. You see how the doubts are? So notice the doubts. But it turns out, staying established in that body sense, things will come forward as needed. Like, not things, but resources, creativity will come forward naturally. You'll just know what to say. You'll know how to move. You'll know when to quiet down. Words, communication, movement, body movement can all come forward easily, effortlessly from the body sense. And it does for all animals. Except the mind identified human. So yeah, we come to a place of total simplicity and a kind of innocence. But it's also quiet. No thought there. No analysis. No second guessing. No judgment. No psychological fear. No doubt. No coming or going. No progress or regress. No distinction between spiritual and conventional. No distinction between practice and spontaneity. No distinction between self and other. No distinction between the womb and the tomb.